tomorrow launches the public impeachment inquiry. So I know a lot of people are really wondering, is this going to be a game changer? Is the public actually going to tune in? Is this going to fundamentally change the calculations for Republicans in the future? They've been very hesitant to condemn Trump in even the lightest terms, but now it's going to be public. Is it possible that that will break through to any of them?
I hope this breaks through. What we're going to see tomorrow, we'll see Bill Taylor especially, who has testified behind closed doors, that there was pressure put on him by the Trump administration to use this military aid as leverage in his negotiations with Ukraine. We're going to see. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier, right? So this is career civil servants. These are people who aren't necessarily directly beholden to the Trump administration. They weren't really Trump campaign loyalists, and this web of corruption and influence has finally hit career civil servants and people who have nothing to gain by defending Trump. And the Trump administration, through this kind of artificial reality that they've conjured up through, only consuming flattering coverage from Fox and assuming that like every Republican loves Trump, they now think that these people who have everything to lose by defending him will also just lie for him, fall on the sword for him, and just take one for the team. And we're not going to see that from Taylor. The issue is whether that will actually matter to Republicans. House Republicans, that's kind of a done deal. It's just more of a formality at this point. They've got the votes in the House. But Senate Republicans, I don't know if they'll actually listen, because we've seen them move the goalposts repeatedly. We've seen people like Lindsey Graham, issue a new proclamation for what constitutes a reasonable and legitimate impeachment inquiry. And his thing now is we need to name the whistleblower. That's just like it's I don't know, goes against everything we stand for public accountability in government, whistleblower protections. But it sets the bar incredibly high, so he doesn't actually have to engage on a substantive level.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you mentioned the naming the whistleblower thing. They've been obsessed with that. That's the Fox News coverage. I have to put together hour-long rundowns every day. I don't know how you do a rundown of they need to name the whistleblower night after night after night, but Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham have done that. So they've got name the whistleblower, they've got read the transcript, which none of them appear to have done. I wonder, from your point of view, is this convincing to right-wingers or perhaps right-leaning independents who are watching this thing, where on the one hand, we have all of these new sets of testimony over the past few weeks. You had Vinland and Taylor and Sondland changed his prior statement and confirms a quid pro quo. So all of this is going on, developing more and more. We find out about the Fareed Zakaria interview that had been scheduled for Zelensky. And then on the other side, you just have name the whistleblower, read the transcript over and over and over, as if none of that was happening. Do you think that that is actually going to be successful, that they can keep people bewildered through the entirety of this process?
I mean, that's a good point. So the right wing has done a great job over the past few decades of really boiling down these complex issues into like really digestible talking points. And you've seen tons of polling. Karl Rove was instrumental in this. You've seen polling from different folks and how they construe these issues to the general public. This is a lot to keep up with, and I maybe you do as well, but I struggle to keep up with it in the day-to-day level. How do we expect someone who this isn't really connected to their full-time job to follow this on a very granular level? Even on the Ukraine front, this military aid, there's like more to it than just, hey, can you do me a favor on this call? This is because they were like reliant on this aid, and that has been completely lost in media coverage. Mm-hmm. They really needed that, and they had a political power position, and they were leveraging that for political gain because Ukraine is at conflict with Russia, and that aid isn't just something that would be nice to have. They like needed it immediately, and they relied on it to in their fight with Russian separatists and with Russia. That never really gets translated. Like there's a complete power dynamic that the Trump administration exploited. The New York Times reported last week that Ukraine was ready to make that concession to get this aid because they were so desperate for it, and the whistleblower raising their concerns and the whistleblower report saved them. It gave them a little bit of a buffer room to fight back against what they knew was ultimately a political ploy.
Yeah, it was ultimately extortion. And I was talking earlier in the show about the White House, the Republican memo laying out some of their points of defense for Trump, saying, for instance, that the aid was eventually given and it was done without Ukraine ever formally launching the investigations. But with the CNN interview being scheduled and the fact that they only released the aid once the whistleblower account had come out, to me, it seems unconvincing that at some point, maybe the 32% of the country that loves Donald Trump more than their own family, they'll stick with him. But for reasonable people, it feels like at that point, how can you possibly deny that this extortion was successful when the interview was being set up, like they were figuring out what the set was gonna look like it was all ready to go?
Yeah, I think we've seen in past elections, even ambiguous claims of corruption and misdeed can tank a candidate. We'll see. We saw with Kentucky how Trump wasn't able to get Bevin across the finish line. That should have been a fairly safe election. I mean, I realize Bevin was unpopular, but in other circumstances, a very popular president could have gotten him across the finish line. The issue I think now people need to look at is whether Trump is just ultimately dead weight for these politicians, and who is going to start distancing themselves from him as we go into an election year next year. I gotta imagine some people will be keeping him at arm's length, similar to how some Democrats do with Pelosi. They just feel like it's not safe to have him around. We could see like a fracture in the Republican electorate. It'd be curious to see.
Yeah, I don't necessarily expect it, but it certainly is possible. Jordan Uhl, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
John, thank you for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.